Tuning in to the online broadcast network, AFTERBUZZ TV. Over 20 million weekly downloads in over 150 countries, and your #1 source for after-show entertainment. AFTERBUZZ TV, the destination for TV superfans. Producing aftershows for over 300 of your favorite TV shows. Interviewing celebrities and showrunners. And bringing you behind-the-scenes exclusives. All thanks to E! Entertainment's Maria Menounos, producer Kevin Undergaro, and internet leader Akamai. Now, let the buzz begin!
Very slow.
Yeah.
Do you recognize it?
This is the theme song to Madam Secretary.
You're so smart.
It comes in at 17-minute mark this episode.
Yes. That's odd. A long intro.
Like, is that even allowed in formatting for TV?
It is if Tia Leone is on the show. Which, fun fact, I learned it's not Tia Leone, it's Taya.
It's Taya?
Yeah. We had Eric on last week, and he kept saying Taya.
Wow.
Anyway, this is another episode of our after show at AFTERBUZZ TV for Madam Secretary. We are here doing episode 5, Blame Canada.
Always.
Always. I was just
like, but not my mom.
When my parents caught me, I was like, Canada.
Stop
Who stole the car? Canada.
I'm your host, Courtney Henderson, and with me tonight we have our full panel back.
The lovelies.
Yes.
Oh, the lovelies! I'm Pat Lambert.
And I'm Sterling Cates.
So that makes you lovely #1 tonight.
You know who's from Canada? Justin Bieber, Shania Twain, Pamela Anderson.
Celine Dion.
Good. Well, there you go.
Celine Dion.
Yeah.
Blame it on Canada.
Now you know.
Blame it on the Canada. No?
We should have that song.
That's
all right.
Okay.
So the first thing we should talk about is probably Canada.
I guess we can. Well, this episode talks about Canada and Iran. Those are the two major. I like this show because she's Madam Secretary, the majority of it's going to be foreign affairs. So each episode we sort of get to like choose a country.
Or two.
Well, you know, or two. And Canada actually plays a significant part in this one. Though not all of that interesting.
Yeah,
if I may say.
Yeah.
At the beginning, I was just kind of like, oh, this is all slow. And then the intro mark came out, and I was like, is it over?
Now the show started.
Now the show started.
Because the prior secretary had commissioned a report about the pipeline that they wanted to build between Canada and the U.S., an oil pipeline, and Tia Leone, Taya, the secretary, doesn't want the report released until she's had time to read it herself.
Yeah, which is 1,000 pages.
Which is why she hasn't gotten into it, because, I don't know, maybe she's trying to stop a nuclear war from happening with Iran.
Right, I can't read that in maybe a year. I don't know if I've ever read a book that big.
Ever.
That big.
We'll work on it.
Harry Potter, that's 700 pages. Okay, anyways. So she refuses to, because Canada was lobbying to release the report because there was stuff in it for them, because they have an economic incentive if this pipeline goes through. Obviously, they'll make a ton more money.
Right.
But, you know. And
it was falsified.
It was, falsified, but it was also just sort of full of bias, because when she is able to review it, it's clear that an oil lobby was part of...
Well, they wrote it.
They wrote it.
And no one has read it.
And it had facts that had nothing to do with the actual pipeline. It was just sort
of how it said the Everglades in Florida.
Right.
Like that has something to do with anything regarding Canada and the oil pipeline. The thing that I thought was interesting, and I like that Marsh, the old Secretary of State, is sort of still around. You know, like we're still sort of seeing all of these little things and problems come up that she has to fix because he had an agenda, and you know it's different in all of these different whatchamacallits, engagements or obligations or commitments. That's what I'm actually looking for.
Yeah.
That you know that she kind of has to fulfill, and also rummage
the existing
through.
Deals.
Like this is one of them where he's like, well, you know, Marsh.
We already got this done.
Yeah, he assured me that this would come out with approval, or however he worded it, to try to like bully her into releasing it. And I love how she was honest. She stood her ground. She said, I will read it and I will release it.
And then Canada tried to give an ultimatum for how long they were going to give her. There was sort of a negotiation between the two.
So they definitely went back into some old rules, some old laws and things that had been agreed upon.
From the War of 1812.
Exactly. And so it's one of those things where Canada wasn't getting the response as quickly as they wanted. So they took over some of our fishing boats. And they weren't going to give them back until it was released. Like, that was going to stop us from...
Though, I mean, that does...
And he was obviously scared that the president was going to get involved when she threatened to call him. And
But of course, as a politician, when if the fishing industries are a huge part of our our foreign and domestic economy, and a lot of those Norwegian or Nova Scotia, not Norwegian, Nova Scotia, a lot of those boats are a big part of our budget. So if they're taken over or if they can't operate, they're going to rally against their politicians.
Yeah,
to do
but
something.
didn't it seem like the president wanted the report to be released?
He just wanted something done. He just wanted it off the desk.
But the thing was, from my understanding, was so what the president wanted, which I don't think Marsh wanted, based on this being a falsified document, was he wants a way for us to stop relying on
other countries.
Right. Specifically the countries in the Middle East, because right now we sort of have to dance with them a little bit because they have something we need
so much.
And so he wants to come out with something that allows us the freedom to stop having to dance with them unless we want to.
Right.
Which is a great juxtaposition for the other conflict of the episode with Iran. But basically, current domestic and foreign issues, we rely so heavily on foreign oil. Mm-hmm. And a good majority of that foreign oil comes from the Middle East, where we also have the highest levels of nuclear instability, of threats to the democratic capitals that are there or growing, instability and militarization of people. That area, along with sort of the nuclear issues there that we know of and don't know of, is currently one of the largest threats to global terror, because Russia, the U.S., India, and the Middle Eastern countries each have and China have the largest amounts of nuclear power. And the border regions in the Middle East, for example, like the area of Kashmir with India and Pakistan, if they are sort of on the middle of a Cold War, if one of those countries starts with a nuclear threat, basically everyone else in the world has to double down, and we would lead to global extinction.
We all have our allies, and so it's kind of like now it's time to back up the threat, which was part of the episode. The chief negotiator in the peace talks with Iran was actually saying, we're not going to be able to come to any agreements. We just need to take military action.
Yeah, and he was never really going with the plan that Madam Secretary had in place, and she finds that out later. I didn't trust him from the beginning.
Well, he was one of Marsh's guys.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that's so interesting, because I actually think, she was so upset that the whole document was falsified and that was basically written by oil lobbyists, because if you think about it, we're not going to get oil through Canada through a pipeline. They're trying to come up with some other type of energy.
Well, we could, because fracking right now is the newest great development in oil. It's like North Dakota's the biggest boom that they've ever had. Fracking is basically like they're able to drill in a different way to access oil pockets that they never could. And it's like highly economical, but also very dangerous. Basically dealing with any sort of fossil fuel or oil is dangerous. But I think the idea of the Canadian pipeline was a way to offset, because we have good relations with Canada,
right,
to offset our amazing need from the Middle Eastern countries for their oil, especially because how are we supposed to navigate peacefully or try to create nuclear stability in that area when we have such a vested interest in our pockets and in our everyday life?
Right.
So
but that's what
oil and sort of environmental protection is the big theme in this episode, which I'm
right, which I think that's why I think Marsh knew that nobody was going to read the document, and so he commissioned an oil lobbyist, or basically an oil lobbyist, to write it, because it was actually an agenda he wanted that would make the president look bad, that would help him as he decided to announce and run for president.
Which is the exact reason why people are so jaded with the idea of politics, because vested interest, look, they're not serving the greater good by doing that. And in a greater scheme of what, Madam Secretary sort of deals with and what we're dealing with is greenhouse gases, and global warming is the largest threat to countries around the world. Mm-hmm. And our reliance. How are we ever going to curb it if we have so much vested interest in our politics who are making money off the side or are taking advantage of capital and not really fighting for our stability or the future?
Well, and having your VP basically run an entire agenda and sort of White House administration to the best of his resources as the vice president against what the president is trying to do, Like, it's one of those things where I think it was going to make him look bad, and that's the only reason why we see Madam Secretary say, I actually need to read this. Once she read it, she's like, we're rewriting this.
Obviously,
like,
this isn't done.
I'm what, 400 pages in, and there's so many things wrong. I can't.
This isn't a report.
Pass this. Yeah, I can't do this. And so she has to go in. Well, so she has to go in, of course, and say that to the president. But of course, she has to give him good news. She can't just come in with, I need 6 months to get this redone.
Right.
Canada's, knocking down our door to get it sent out and released and approved right now. And I know you're looking to do that, but we can't do that right now. And it was really interesting because he lost it on her. Mm-hmm. What did you guys think about that?
That was kind of like, oh, where'd that come from? When the president was like, well, why don't you start doing your job? When he's been so reliant on her for everything.
But I think that's because he's been relying on her to negotiate in live time situations where, like, there was a conflict and it needed to be resolved within a certain amount of hours. Whereas this is a continuing issue. This Canadian pipeline, like, she could have just passed it so it's off the table, but there's more work to be done. And for a president, so much of their politics is what have they gotten done, what have they accomplished out of all the promises that they've made, knowing full well, or you should know full well, that the way our democracy works is very, very slow. And that's to our benefit. That's how democracy does work, is it takes time to make things change. But he has pressure from all over the world to get things off his table.
Yeah. It was interesting to me that also in that scene, not only that he attacked her the way he did and yelled at her, but the way the chief of staff defended her in that moment, because that's really not their relationship.
Yeah.
He never has done that before. So it was interesting to see that dynamic there.
Well, and you talked about not trusting the chief negotiator for these peace talks in Iran, and he was one of Marsh's guys, and he was trying to stick to a plan that Marsh had put in play again. So now we have these two different things, this pipeline and these peace talks, and both of them are kind of sour, and it's because of things that Marsh had going.
And, well, there's two real main issues to what has happening there. Is one, the vested interest of political gain. So he's playing the political game more than doing what he's supposed to do. He reveals once he's been let go that the reason that he was pushing all these things through and pushing a certain agenda was his own ambition, was his own political ambition, which is clouding the judgment and what's actually happening. And then the second issue is warring philosophies. She has a much more moderate stance on what, or even liberal stance on what should happen with these two deals, and he has a much more conservative, militarized stance. He even says he expects bombs over. Where did he say?
I don't know.
The capital in Iran. Oh no, I don't know it.
Oh, Tel Aviv.
Tel Aviv.
Yeah.
He was saying.
I just wasn't ensuring context where you were going with it.
Anyways,
but he was
expecting war in the Middle East.
Yeah.
And she wants that to be the last possible situation.
Well, of course. Well, and even the president wanting to make the threat, they're like, wait a second, if we make the threat,
there's no going back.
There's no going back.
Back it up.
And I mean, that's what we're dealing with right now in our U.S. politics with, the terror crisis with ISIS, and then all instability in that region is two different ideals of how can we ever find peace and spread democracy, and then sort of the knee-jerk reaction to bomb,
Right. But that's what I loved about her in this episode, and it made me so not like Marsh and kind of what was going on, and I will be interested to see kind of how much there's left of that.
And we know
at some point everything he had his hand in.
Marsh had died because of.
He died in the plane crash.
But wasn't it sort of because he was up to no good? He was doing something on the black market?
We don't know. Foul play.
That's what I was going to say. It's like now that we're finding out all this kind of stuff that Marsh was really up to, it kind of makes me think about, like, was his death accidental, and like when are we going to figure that part out? And
it's also interesting. The tagline of the show is not politics as usual, because I think it's interesting to look at all the different characters and really see that this secretary doesn't have political ambition that is clouding her judgment
at
on these
all,
things.
yeah.
At all. She's really not being lobbied by people or being paid by people, which wouldn't always be the case.
Oh, which was the other thing. Remember, that was something that Marsh had done, that she was thinking that he had these oil lobbyists write up that document or report because they were one of the main contributors to his campaign.
Right. And Nadine sort of reveals that, but she says, but that wasn't why he did it. But how can we trust that?
Right.
Should we talk about Nadine?
We've been trusting. I want to save that because it's like the last thing that the episode revealed.
Yep.
Anyway, but okay, so the peace talks. So we see the chief negotiator go.
Peace talks with Iran. So
yes.
Canada's Canada.
Canada's Canada. Well, so we get our boats back. You know, with Canada, we get our boats back. They realize they don't really have anything to stand on because at the end of the day,
they can't hold us ransom. They
can't do anything to us. And she's not saying no. She's saying not today.
Right.
So
and she recommissions the report, and they say they both have a vested interest in, you know, doing better for the environment.
But that's after the peace talks with this chief negotiator who...
Which she set up through the Canadian ambassador, correct?
But no,
he can
not
only
initially.
Go on, technically,
and initially he was in New York for the peace talks.
So the Iranian
with the chief
ambassador
negotiator,
was in New York for the peace talks with our chief negotiator.
And they didn't go well because
the negotiator was doing his own thing.
The deal and the letter that she gave saying if they turn this reactor off and they can have it inspected to actually confirm that it is off, then we'll start selling them plane parts again. And there's the sort of this trade agreement that will come into play that we have not had with them. And so
since 1980, she says. Or they haven't had official negotiations on.
We haven't had formal diplomatic relations
since 1980.
Right. That's the last time that one of our presidents, or the two leaders, one went and visited the other. And I don't remember which way they said that happened. But yeah, so it doesn't go well. And so it gets to the point where the president says, airstrikes, we're doing it. Like they didn't agree. They walked out of the room. It wasn't adjourned. It wasn't dismissed. They walked out.
Yep.
And that's when I loved in that whole meeting where
and the secretary was saying it's big enough deal that we just get them into the same room as us. We have to come back to the table.
Right. We have to. And so I thought it was so interesting. So after they all sit in that room and they meet, and this negotiator basically says they left. It's done.
Yep.
Like there's no other action to take than this military action that I said in the first place. It's exactly what we suspected from the beginning, kind of a thing. And then the president says airstrikes, but then says Bess, and takes her out. So it's like, okay, you just yelled at her because she's not doing her job, and now you're gonna use the most endearing term you could give her by calling her Bess and take her out to a kind of a private conversation, and they go talk about this report, and it's one of those words I feel like the type of conversation that the president wants to be able to have. He wants to be candid. He wants to be able to question. He wants, in a way that's human, because sitting in a room with your entire administration that's helping make these decisions, and all of the intel and all of the military officers and they're commanders and generals, and whoever else is supposed to be in that room. I don't even know politically who's supposed to be in that room, whose job it is to sit in on those talks. But to go outside of that, because in front of all of them, you can't go question those things and kind of like sit and kind of.
Well, that's the real core difficulty
spitball,
the most difficult part of being a president is who do you assign and how much bias do they have from where they're coming from. So when he pulls her aside, he's looking for some sort of objective.
Yeah, I feel like he trusts her opinion maybe more than anyone else in that room. So that's probably why he wanted to get it.
Which is why she's...
Yeah, well, and I know that that's also part of, I think, why he wanted her, because he knew, like we've said, the political ambition is not there. She's basically doing a huge favor to a close, old friend.
And to the country,
yeah. Well, and to the country, but I mean... Yeah. I think she sort of felt it was more a duty at this point than any sort of ambition.
Yep.
And I love that in that meeting, that's where she says, I have a favor, and it's to get this report 6 months down the road. The one we have is falsified. I'm not putting my name on this. It's basically bogus. And he says, well, that's a big favor. And she goes, well, it's not as big as the one I'm about to ask you for, which is for one more day. And I'm kind of like, okay, obviously she's going to go try to figure out this whole Iran thing. She's going to go try to talk to Giovanni and figure out how to make this deal happen, because every other time she's used her judgment, every other time she's tried to coordinate something and give something, it's worked out. Like with Canada, they kind of backed down because she realized that in order to make them okay with waiting 6 months for this pipeline report and deal to go through, she had to give them something to kind of sit on, which she gave them. I don't know if I wrote it down, but that passageway.
Oh, I don't remember exactly what it's called, but yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, but she gave them the passageway that we've held from them or we've been fighting over, and so now they can use that for trade, etc. And so they're happy.
Yeah.
They're cool to sit on this and wait for it to be done right. And
She's
then
really good at compromise with everyone.
It's amazing though that every episode is one of the major plot lines is insubordination. Somebody going behind her back or not doing as she says.
Yeah, I feel like at the end of the day, with every situation we've seen her in, it's pretty much she just has to do it herself, and she can't really
Which is
trust
amazing
anyone
because
else.
she has the highest position, so she's able to fire the chief negotiator.
anyone, yeah.
But it seems almost impossible that chief negotiator would ever be able to go through that meeting having so clearly
withholding the information that
and
she
so
said
clearly going against her objectives. You know, I wonder
especially
is that what happens every. I mean, I feel like that can't be. How do you run
I don't think
a
so.
department when every episode consistently people are insubordinate?
Yeah, and I think we're slowly getting rid of Marsha's guys, like we've talked about.
The old school.
Yeah,
Yep.
so now
or
that they're kinda getting
converting,
out.
like the speechwriter.
Sure.
No,
Right.
yeah, like the speechwriter, right? He said the.
Even Nadine. Well, Nadine, we don't know where we
Yeah,
stand.
Nadine.
I know.
But
Questionable bitch.
Nadine has seemed. Oh, I guess we'll talk about it later.
You
Hold
can
on.
say it. I won't like
We can get to
hold your tongues.
the Iranian negotiation. Then when they have this cocktail party at the end.
So Canada is throwing this party, and I didn't really catch why they were throwing the
I
party.
They were throwing it in celebration of her, like welcoming her to the office or something.
Okay, that it was
She
just
said
as
it was,
simple
like,
as
for
that.
me. Nice.
Because I knew it was for her, but I wasn't sure if it was with the pipeline deal. You know, if it
Yeah,
was
well,
somehow connected.
she thanked him for throwing it for her.
Right.
She was like, "Thank you for throwing me this party."
Which so they have the party, so we know that's coming. We have to talk about all of her staff and bringing +1s, and Blake
Yeah.
saying, you know, if you want to bring a +1, I just need to know their names so I can put them on the list. And little Blakey Poo.
Blake says the name Chris.
Yeah.
But
that's
then
not
nobody
un-
goes deeper. We don't know if it's a boy or a girl, right?
That's the point. That's the whole, because when they're in the office, you know, they both have been dating somebody else.
The speechwriters.
Daisy and the speech, yeah. And Jay, I think his name is. This is another thing that it's
They don't
weird.
say their names enough.
No. And I've actually actively listened to the show and trying to get names because, you know, when
You should know them by the 5th episode.
Well,
Yeah.
and when we're sitting here talking, it's, you know, oh, the guy and the this and the girl.
Yeah.
It's like, who knows what we're talking about when we're just saying the guy and the girl, you know. So the speechwriter and Daisy, I believe her name is, they clearly have their own thing going, but they're both dating other people. And
Now, what do you think of that? I thought it's a great plot line. It's a fun idea. And in the first couple episodes, I thought they had really funny repartee back and forth. But I don't feel the chemistry as much, and they don't really make me laugh. Like, those secondary characters aren't hitting the punchlines as well as I think they could.
I like the idea because they needed something in the office to kind of like spice it up a little bit. But between the two of them, I don't see like a romantic chemistry.
guess
which
it's
is
just-
what they're trying to imply.
Yeah.
So far.
I mean, I see it as far as like if I read the script, I could get it. I think the lines are funny and the ideas are there, but their dynamic, I don't feel is fully developed, or they're just not really hitting again the punchlines. They're not making me laugh through this romance.
Through the whole thing. See, and
Though they're cute, they're funny.
it'll be interesting. I think it's more for me. It's more of a chemistry thing. I don't believe it.
Yeah.
I don't believe it.
You know,
Exactly.
Like when
considering
they're coming up the stairs, the little back and forth.
Because Nadine says no one cares, and she's I think 100% implying we don't care if you're sleeping together. We don't care what you do on your own time. We don't care.
We're busy.
Nobody
Exactly.
cares.
Right.
Yeah.
And so much so, and I think part of that comes from the fact that Nadine actually doesn't care and nobody else cares. But also, she had her own office romance that went
Exactly.
undetected. And it's one of those where it's like people are so involved in their own lives and in what's going on with them and their own political
job,
ambition
yeah.
and their own job. Yeah, exactly.
I don't
They
need time for your water cooler.
Well, they're not like
Romance.
They're not even gonna like look up long enough or
Right.
like, you know, take away from looking in the mirror at themselves long enough to recognize somebody else's
Right.
office
And
romance
the two of them,
or
because
romance
the
period.
two of them aren't the highest in the teams, are so scared about their job security and will like compromise their relationship in the workplace.
Yeah. I'm taking the stairs. So I thought I would take the stairs. I thought you would take the elevator. It's
We
like
take them at the same time.
Yeah, it's not that weird for them to come in at the same time.
I mean, I like what they're trying to accomplish with the tension. I just don't think maybe it's on the actor.
Well.
It's not executed.
And it'll be interesting
enough.
to see that play out and kind of see whether we think it is more of a writing, more of a directing, more of the acting.
Yeah.
I mean, because it truly might just be these two actors just don't have the chemistry. Because I've heard you can't really fake that. And from my own experiences on set, you can't.
Yeah.
I mean,
unless the lines are so funny.
But even that.
And even the show generally is slow feeling. It's not very comedic. They don't hit a lot. You know, like in the beginning, our first episode, you know, Aaron Sorkin writes really fast. So so there's always sort of a pace. So his comedy goes very quickly. And so it works. This is a very slow-moving show. And that's even on Téa Leoni's acting. She doesn't rush through scenes.
Right.
You know, so it's hard, I guess, to come from some of those serious moments to then these secondary characters who are meant to be somewhat comic relief.
Yeah. Which Blake, I say Blake. Which Eric, you know, in Skyping with us last week, talked about that and kind of how he's starting to see a pattern in reading each script that they work on, that they kind of cut to him to like give a little bit of lightness.
Light moment.
And
because I do think that he, of all the characters, hits the comic relief the best.
I think, and I don't. So which makes me think that it's not the writing.
Yeah.
It's the execution of it, because same writers. Oh my god.
Same writers. Different characters.
Same writers.
Well, because even in that,
wrote his lines
who are the guests? Who are the guests going to be in the sort of back and forth? The other two characters, the speechwriter and Daisy, create sort of the tension, but he really gets the laugh lines in the way those scenes play.
He said last week that there was something big coming up for his character. So
but we'd start to see his love life develop.
Yeah.
Like, is he gay?
Well, that's the point. We don't know. So what do you think?
Super cute. It's hard for me to tell.
I didn't think he was gay until this episode.
I didn't really. I mean, I thought that he was like gay appealing. Like, obviously, I was like, he's delicious. But
we all thought that.
I don't think we ever got like the. Unless it's because he's like playing the assistant, which is often the secondary character is like a gay, funny assistant.
Yeah.
So unless he's sort of fitting that trope, but I didn't get like, oh, I think he's gay. I guess I didn't really care about his outside life. I wanted to see what that little team element was more about. But now this is sort of adding the flavor.
So but I definitely thought it.
And it is funny when Jay's like, is it appropriate
straight.
to ask? Like, we can't ask that.
Yeah, like, well, what's the name? And he's like, Chris. And I was waiting for it to be Alex, just because I feel like that's the most gender neutral name. Because the spelling isn't even given. Like, but like.
Right.
Girls spell their name different, Chris, than guys. I mean, and I'm looking at the captioning, so of course it's spelled it with the boy way.
We're very analytical about this.
Right.
But Daisy wasn't surprised at all when he said Chris. Like, I would have been like, oh, is that some sort of song?
Yeah, I would have been like, oh. Tiffer?
Or
Tim? Krista.
But it'll be interesting because I also paid attention because Eric was telling us, you know, when he first read the sides and everything for this part, or the breakdown, it was very, you know, Kennedy-esque, kind of this put together. And so I watched that and I was like, he is such a Kennedy. And I just...
Well, it's the clean-cut white kid thing.
Well, yeah. But I mean...
It's a little racy, but...
It's
sort of like racy. A socioeconomic style thing, but you know.
So it's just interesting because I kind of watched, and everything he talked about that he kind of envisioned in this character, I see him executing. And you know, I think they want us to think he's gay. I think he's going to end up being straight.
I think he's going to end up being straight. Or bi. That would be fun. Whatever. I mean, the thing
just
is,
feel like the show, and I hope the show doesn't become about sex. You know what I mean?
Although How to Get Away with Murder is very sexy.
But that's what I mean. It's going to ruin it too fast.
Well, I like that the show deals with heavier topics. And doesn't sort of skirt the line of being a scandal, being sort of very soap opera-esque.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's not. I feel like it needs to get funnier and it needs to move a little bit quicker. Overall notes for like the enjoyment of the show.
Right. The other thing that Eric said that I'm now paying attention to, which I didn't see in this episode, other than what you were saying, is the whole political party. They've specifically left out whether this presidency is Democratic or Republican on purpose. And so it wasn't until you made the comment about kind of the liberal-esque, that I'm like, okay, that's maybe the first hint at that, because she didn't want to jump straight to that. At the same time, does anybody of any political belief want to go to war?
Right.
Right.
Especially nuclear
the Democrats,
war.
like, unanimously voted for the war in Iraq when it first came up. Like, you don't have to be.
Yeah, well,
one
we
party
got
to
hit on our
feel
own
one
soil.
thing.
Well,
right.
of course we want to make sure that that's remedied.
There's only one House representative who said no. It's a very interesting report.
Yeah.
We'll talk about it another
Not
day.
falsified.
Not falsified. But I didn't even realize that. That is really interesting to see how they're not playing.
Yeah, well, he was talking about that a little bit when we asked him about how he felt about the comparison to Hillary Clinton and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And he was like, well, it's kind of a crazy...
He got offended.
Yeah,
He's like, no,
it's
no.
annoying, like, because our show is so neutral and it's obvious that it's not.
It's really interesting. It is very neutral.
So pay attention to that. Well, I want to keep paying attention to that.
I never thought of that.
To make sure we see, so we can find these little clues, because I think at some point they will tell us.
Well, I think
because there will be a campaign, or there will be something that happens that's just so obviously one way or the other.
Well, it's really understanding what the president's politics are, because she doesn't interface with any of sort of the elected officials. You know, she's not she's not having to pass
She's doing the foreign affairs.
Right, she's foreign affairs. She's not having to pass things through the House or Senate. So, you know, being blue or red, it doesn't, or green, doesn't really matter for her. But I don't know where the president stands. Very interesting.
So we'll have to just pay attention to that. All right, so at this party, which is kind of where we started tangenting from, we see that the dance between, now I'm going to forget their names,
Daisy
Nadine and Henry, happens to distract so that Madam Secretary can go meet with Shivani, which was also so interesting because this passageway that she made with Canada must have been something that they really wanted and have needed. I'm still not quite clear on why America's just like, if it was something that we didn't care about and we were just going to throw a bone to them, like, why have we been holding on to it for so long?
I'm sure there's money in it or some sort, but
yeah, well, it's good that we have, because now we have it. So
yeah, but you know what I mean? It's kind of one of those where it's like, for this to have been such a big deal for them, they're willing to let this pipeline thing sit for a little bit.
Canada.
They're willing. What does that mean?
Well, they're not.
What are they going to do?
Diplomatically I mean, they're a very important country.
Yes.
Canada rocks. But they're not as, we're on generally very good terms with them.
Well, yeah. I mean, considering they were like, oh, we're going to take your fishing boats. And we're like, okay, well, then we're going to send all of your NHL players back to your
Canada
country.
doesn't pose a major diplomatic threat to us.
No, which is why we want the pipeline.
They wanted to, but they don't. No, they don't. Any sense to them.
No. Right. Or for us. Yeah, that makes no sense. We got to figure out this whole piece in the Middle East.
Oh, yeah, you can have it back.
Yeah, so she meets with Giovanni, and we find out that the information was withheld by the chief negotiator. And I love that, because it just goes to show she's so fair. She's so dedicated to doing what's right and not worried as much about who's right. And that to me came when she just kind of said, okay, so he didn't give you that information. How do I know you're telling the truth? She still questioned, she was still going to give her chief negotiator the benefit of the doubt that he's lying and saying, well, I had to walk out because the only thing I was told was there's going to be bombs.
Right, exactly.
If we don't have this turned off.
And how reputable is she that he came and he said, I wanted to give the second chance, not just because you're the Secretary of State, but because I thought maybe there was more to it.
And like, he knew that she wasn't the one behind it.
I knew that maybe you would want something different. And you're a bigger power.
Which also I found so interesting, because they clearly have a history that we're just starting to see unravel a little bit. Because he knew she was in the CIA, and he knew that the code name for him was boyfriend. And I feel like if you're a CIA operative, code names like that kind of stay code.
Well,
better than
what we've sort of heard from her past is that she has a lot of her training is in the Middle East.
Right.
So it's presumed that, I don't know if have they ever met before? It doesn't look like he's ever interfaced with her, but she knows the area and the issues very intimately.
No, but he said something about, no, he knew that she called him boyfriend. How did he know that? And she said, well, there was more of a code thing. I had my eye on you. And
it was more of a joke.
What are you talking about?
Right.
I don't think so.
Well, didn't she say that? She said it was like, it was more of like a...
No, but the name boyfriend.
Not a joke, but a code name.
Not that she... not that it was a code thing. Like, she genuinely had her eye on him and was watching him. And she said, because I thought you would be someone to help lead us to peace.
Right.
And he has the best line there. He says, I have a 7-year-old son, and I don't want him to wake up to war as much as you don't want
To inherit it.
To
Yeah.
inherit it just
I
as much
love
as you
that
don't
as
want.
well.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
That was a great scene.
And that's why he risked going and meeting here on Canada soil,
Right.
Canadian soil.
To give it another try.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so she gives him the letter. It's not signed. They're going to get it signed as soon as everything goes according to plan to get this reactor turned off. It gets turned off, and we see that what am I
Chief
trying to say?
negotiators let go.
But yeah, no, yeah, and then there's that.
Yeah, well, and back to the scene when she gives him the thing that is unsigned, that just goes to another example of her kind of just taking the higher ground. As long as what's happening is right, then she doesn't care what happens, because she's
Right.
like,
It's not about my ego,
whatever
it's
you
not
go
about-
and tell your president, like, we don't like that you backed us into a corner, like, that's totally fine, just as long as this gets done.
Yeah, and I really like that it was kind of like, use this whole situation to your advantage so that you look like you strong-armed us into
Right.
doing this
Right.
kind of a thing.
As long
rather
as these
than
things still stand.
Right.
I guess my issue with the episode and maybe the show is that I don't feel like there's enough thrill and suspense. And I know, and maybe it's trying to be more realistic into some way, but did you feel on the edge of your seat or a lot of tension throughout the episode?
No,
I mean,
but I don't
Canada thing
necessarily
was-
watch this show looking for that.
I guess I just watch TV for that. You know, like it's the basic formats of like TV is that I needed to feel excited about the idea that that was going to happen in the back room.
Yeah.
You know?
But
I
you didn't.
don't know if it's maybe because she plays the part so even keel.
And
Maybe
so
like it's-
calm. And,
So calm that I'm never stressed. But I feel like I should be. I don't know.
Going to war with
That's one of my issues with, I think, the series so
the
far.
series as a whole.
Yeah, is that the suspense isn't always there. And maybe it's just because she plays a very strong, calm and
Collected.
composed
Yeah.
person, but also wouldn't there be more of a frenzy or with the people around you?
I
don't know.
I don't know. I've never worked at the White House.
I have not either.
Maybe next year.
Shocking. Bye. Gotta go.
To the White House?
AFTERBUZZ to White House. That's how. This is
Could
the.
you imagine?
This is the transition program. I'm here to educate.
And
okay,
the NSA
so let's
is
talk about the
now
hot
shutting
dad.
us down. Yes.
Yeah.
That was the best moment of the whole episode.
How could you
is
not
when
love
he
this
punched that
episode
guy.
for that alone?
So the son has a report that he has to do about a leader.
No. That's
What?
that's totally separate.
About a parent.
Dad made the arm candy
TMI's
list.
arm candy list.
TMI.
He's so
Can we just say
cute.
TMZ?
Like, yeah,
I know they said
that's great.
TMI, but I love that.
Yeah.
Number 3 behind 2 supermodels.
You know what I hated the other day was someone talking about Michelle Obama and how much they liked her. And they were like, well, she has great arms. And I was like, not
That's
the
why you
reason
like
to like
her?
the first lady. No respect.
But she does have great arms.
She does have great arms. And that is part of like her thing is like being fit. But
But
come on.
that's not the only reason
I don't
you
like
should like
sexually
her.
objectifying our leaders.
I don't think
Though he is a hot dad.
admiring
He is really
arms.
hot.
Yeah.
Admiring. Okay, that's fair.
Admiring Michelle Obama's arms, I don't think is sexually objectifying her.
I guess that's true. But the dad, we do
Sexually
enjoy the sexual
objectify.
We
gratification.
don't
of
hate
this
the way he
episode.
looks.
No.
What did you guys think about the whole bar scene? Well, so I love, before we get there, I love how the dad is just sort of like throwing away this whole report of the son because he's like, he wants to do you. And it's like, no, he doesn't want to interview Madam Secretary. He doesn't want to interview his mom because that's exactly what his teacher wants.
And he's an anarchist, and he doesn't believe in following the system.
Exactly.
Right.
I love him.
So I'm like,
That kid.
no, there's nothing about wanting to interview his mother that I think is a part of it. And I think it kind of bothered me that the dad was like so hung up on, well, just go interview your mom. It's like, he asked you.
Right.
Let it go and just
then
give
when
the kid the info he needs to do the report.
After this fight happens in the bar, which is a fantastic scene, you see the dad really rise to the occasion and really so like.
And that was a completely different side of his character.
And the
'cause-
son, I think, had never seen his dad in that element
Bingo.
because then he asked questions that he hadn't asked before. He was actually interested
Yes.
in his past in the army, military.
Marine Corps.
You know,
Just, I get specific
I
because,
like that because you know,
yeah, well, dating somebody that's in the Air Force.
military is the appropriate umbrella term, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
All
okay.
branches are part of the U.S. military.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks. Okay. Well, that was an interesting scene.
To see that, and then to get the son to ask all the questions, and I actually liked seeing them kind of do their own thing, because we've kind of seen the parents with the daughters kind of one-on-one in these little conversations, and we haven't gotten as much from the son in that way. And so I liked that it was him, I guess, of all of them. But I also thought it was...
Well, he's very inquisitive about the world. He clearly has some sort of political ambition, or at least ideology.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely has an ideology.
As a young man, he's like interested in investigating. So it's fun to see.
But I loved, and it kind of, I hate even saying it this way. Like, it had to be the son, because he got to see his dad be a man, and I don't think what happened in the bar would be as impressive to a daughter, or not to his daughters, as it was to the son.
A gendered idea.
Yeah.
Well, that's only because
I mean?
our armed forces are predominantly male, and that's sort of a gendered idea of what that serving identity is.
Definitely.
And a masculine idea of, like, standing up and fighting.
Yeah, I mean, standing up for yourself. Exactly. I mean, well, I also think that the older daughter doesn't really have a problem kind of opening her big mouth.
True.
When things need to be said.
And I mean, of the whole episode, that was the most tense moment, was when sort of the drunken corporal is, spouting off about his own politics.
What did you think about that?
Because you would think that first family would have a security team.
I just thought
even
something
with
else.
the husband and the son.
Yeah, wouldn't they have a security team?
Clearly not. I don't know.
I mean, they're...
No.
But I think, well, they do. They absolutely... I mean, all the families have security. All the elected officials in the Capitol have security
She's not an
teams.
elected official.
I know, but she's the fourth most powerful person in the world. So if they stole her kids, political ransom from another country...
Fair enough. Fair
I
enough.
was sort of like, how is this happening? Wouldn't someone descend? But anyways.
But that goes back into the whole liberal conservative, because it was a military man, which are typically more on the conservative side, angry with him and his wife's politics.
For taking a more liberal stance and trying to find peace rather than go to war, rather than retaliate.
But the reasoning for him going to war was also interesting, and it was a perspective I'd never considered before, not having the same experiences and the same loss as somebody in the military that's been to war, that's lost friends, that's lost unit members, and wants to go not only get justice for our country, but also for the lives that were lost, and to make it worth their deaths.
This is where I'll enter sort of our political debate about issues with war and military. Sideline, now it's debate time. It's obviously so important that our military that we respect our military and that we care. But one of the biggest issues with going to war is that we spiral out of control. For example, like the VA and vets, the access to care right after war for so many isn't given, is mismanaged. The VA, it's criticized very publicly in the media about how a lot of the cases for, a lot of people coming back from war with post-traumatic stress syndrome end up on drugs, end up with none of the healthcare benefits that they were originally provided with. There's mismanagement in the military. Obviously, when we're going into these war zones, for example, there's a report out about drone strikes. Drone strikes, the idea is, okay, we lose less men when we drop a bomb. But when those bombs go off, we don't just kill the militants, we often kill civilians in those areas. And then those families related to those civilians, imagine if people bombed us here and they killed your family members walking down the street because militants were hiding in your neighborhood. Wouldn't you feel radicalized to join the effort against a foreign power who's dropping bombs on your head? I mean, wouldn't you feel the exact same way that so many people do in this American hate sentiment, And then to see boots, we're always fearful of boots on the ground, but it's almost impossible to execute the peace goals that we have without boots on the ground. And we don't have the money and capital to back it up. And then we have vested interest in... Sorry, I have lots of thoughts.
That's good.
It's just one of the most intensely complex issues the American people face. And so quickly people sort of just, well, you don't support the troops. And it becomes sort of this polarized debate. When in reality, we have to realize one of the issues with being a Western country declaring war on an Eastern country is that we, at our base, have very different cultural ideologies. How can we expect them to, have democracy and peace for people when so much of their basic culture and law goes against what we think are basic human rights. I mean, look at women in the Middle East who are culturally oppressed so much more than women are here. How can we almost expect those cultures to rapidly get up to pace with where we are and force them there when they're so far behind in those goals? So
I don't think we need to debate.
No, I mean, it's just a very
But I
complex
definitely
issue.
think that there's a difference, which I also liked, because on the flip side, you know, he was going against this drunk guy in uniform, was going against Madam Secretary and her beliefs, and, you know, razzing the dad, Henry, but Henry served. So that would make him maybe a little bit on the conservative side. You know what I mean? So it still kind of plays it both ways as far as the show and not knowing. But I also think, going kind of back to the supporting of the troops, there's a difference between supporting the troops physically, like the actual people that have committed their lives to helping protect our country. Because I guarantee there are men and women that serve in our military voluntarily that don't always agree with the decisions that are being made.
Absolutely not.
And the job that they have to do.
And they can't be insubordinate in the process.
And that's something that I think can be lost on us because of the things we take for granted because of what they're doing.
That's the biggest thing, is we so quickly take for granted how much they give and how much our country, how difficult it really is to go to war. We're so quick to say we're America. We can get away with anything. American national spirit obviously has a huge ego to it. That's why, you know, vets from the World War II were so publicly loved, because we had won the World War.
Right.
Like, they came back on the highest wave of success, even after all that destruction.
Right.
Now we're going to wars where people feel very ambivalent and confused and scared about what we're doing. And then the people serving are not being celebrated as much as they have in the past.
Right. Well, because people don't agree with the fact that we're at war.
People don't know how to feel.
Yeah.
And so they're not agreeing with this, and we haven't won. There's no kind of clear
and there is honestly
progress.
no way to win in how big the issue is now.
Right.
I mean, it's not just Iran and Pakistan. It's not just the countries. It's groups in countries that are going over borders and
recruiting constantly.
And it's all different sorts of threats.
And I think that that's interesting because, you know,
and there's plenty of people who don't agree with what's happening who live there. It's not the majority of people who want this sort of hate to be coming from their countries and regions.
Right. And that's kind of part of why I love the show, because all of these things that we've talked about, that all these points that you're raising, are because we're watching a show that's gone and is discussing
and
this whole
fictionalized ideas, but it's still
but now we're not talking about fictionalized things. We're talking about our actual troops, our actual current state of the country, of the world, and things that are going on in our lives that affect us. And that's something that we kind of discussed with Eric last week as well. I love the fact that something that is fictional can give you insight and interest in learning more about something that's real.
That's correct.
Something that's going on in your life, something that affects you, because I'm sure there's lots of people that don't even know who the Secretary of State today is. But maybe watching a show like this, nailed it.
I got it.
But watching a show like this, they're going to go look it up and kind of say, oh, I wonder what they're doing. I wonder what kind of foreign policy they're doing. Is working with Canada on a pipeline, is that something that the Secretary of State would actually be working on and looking into that?
But what I really find, the moment that I found the most interesting was when the chief negotiator fights with Madam Secretary, and basically the warring ideologies of she is for peace and for peace talks, and he believes that the end result will always be a military action. And that is one of the most heated things right now, especially as we're going into war, is how do we react? People get very quick to either be gun shy or gun heavy. And it is almost impossible when we're on a sort of constant brink of a Cold War with nuclear instability in this area, that it's too rash in the American spirit to go to war. But at the same time, how can we avoid it?
Right. And I also loved going back to Henry and just having served, and the son being more inquisitive, asking him the questions, asking him about, well, weren't you in a war?
I want to understand what that really means.
And I loved Henry's response when he's talking about, because his son asks, did you kill anyone, and how many? And again, it's one of those where it still boggles my mind when people think that men and women join the military because they enjoy or want to go drop bombs. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's some twisted people in the world.
Right.
You know, I don't know if they're in our U.S. military. I would say no, especially just because of how hard it is and kind of the structure and kind of how focused and dedicated you have to be in order to kind of stay a part of it. You know, they don't mess around, especially when they're sending you overseas.
They can objectively criticize what they're being told to do, or, you know, how they really feel about the war.
Yeah.
You know?
Well,
so many of them are going to fall on either side of it.
Yeah, and Henry said, he made it very clear, I had a job to do, I had targets to hit, and that was kind of thing. And he said he doesn't, there's not a day that goes by that he doesn't think about.
Exactly. And that, I mean, I fought tears in my eyes because dating somebody in the military and just kind of, he's also a pilot. He may or may not face some of those same decisions and may have to live with some of those same results. I don't know. He's not allowed to talk about what he does.
Right.
So it's one of those things where I just kind of felt for him in that moment, and knowing that this doesn't go away, and that now his son kind of sees that. And I think there's this level of reverence and kind of respect now that his son will have, not only just from watching his dad handle that guy and kind of put him in his place and stand up for himself, but also because of the heaviness and the weight that he...
Of that responsibility to be in duty.
Yes, and that he recognized the weight of making those decisions to be in the military, making the decision to say, okay, yes, I have to hit these targets, and it may or may not land on the civilian. You know what I mean? Anyway, all right, let's move on to something a little bit more scandalous.
Okay.
Let's move on to Nadine. Nadine.
Hot Nadine.
She's being looked into now.
She used to sleep with the old
I think she should be looked into now, though, especially since she came out last week with telling Madam Secretary that she was sleeping with Marsh, and they had this affair and all this stuff. But even it was suspicious that she was so for... She's like, why are you trying to read this report? Like, it's
nobody
not that,
reads it. Only the writers read it.
Deal. Like, it was at Marsh's agenda, and like it should just be passed. Blah blah. Like, so she was very quick to like to still
and what was she covering
Marsh.
up? Yeah,
it's like very...
How much of it was
like
true?
she was covering up something.
Well, and I think that's why, because a lot of things haven't added up. You know, the whole story about with the soccer balls, and he would go to these countries and he'd give out these soccer balls, and he didn't want the press to ever talk about it because he was just that good of a guy. And then we hear Chief of Staff for the President talking about how, oh no, I'm sure there are photos, and the second that he decides to run for president, you know, there's going to be photos all over of him, like standing with kids and soccer balls and all these wonderful things that he's been doing as vice president and blah, blah, blah. And so I think the more that comes out about Marsh and the more that Madam Secretary can piece together that he had an agenda, that it didn't line up with the president's, that the people that he had working for him or under him that he appointed very much aligned themselves with Marsh's agenda. So much so that they're willing to go completely against what
the current agenda is being set.
Exactly what the president and Madam Secretary are saying. This is what we need to do. We need to go to these peace talks and say this. And so I loved the scene between the two of them when he got fired. She held her ground.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I just think that it's becoming very clear that she's having to sort of weed out all of these people, and Nadine may be next. That's what she's trying to figure out. And I love that she went to Blake for it, because it shows, kind of like we talked about with him last week, he is her guy.
Right.
She knows she can trust him, and she has to with this, because she doesn't have the time to do it herself.
She goes, what can I trust you with? And he goes, well, your job and your life.
Yeah.
I don't know if Nadine is all bad. I mean, I guess she could be.
I don't think she's all bad.
But she has been pretty... I don't know.
Resistant? Hesitant? Or
I think she's just really like pro-Marsh.
Yeah.
I don't know that she's pro-Marsh's agenda, but she's pro-Marsh. And that, I think, is more what she's concerned with, because it's kind of like, okay, all of the people that worked with him did believe in his agenda, are going against what they're being told by their higher authorities. And so where are you going to fall?
The way our politics works anyways? Like, look at how do people in D.C., like when I went to school, it was all politics kids that were in my major, so all of them were going into a world where it was like you had a job for 2 years. If you were lucky, 4 years, and then you had to trade. But your job is to be loyal to your person, but at the same time you have no sort of longevity. Like people in the White House, that turnover, their job is to be as loyal as possible to the people who are currently leading. And then how does that compromise their ability to be loyal to the next person who takes a position?
Right.
And there's almost no
it's really
security or stability. So how can there ever be, you know,
especially
trust?
because the people that I would imagine go to work, I almost said in Wall Street, but they go to work in DC, they are going because they're passionate about a specific set of political beliefs that got them there, that motivated them.
Or
that
ambitions.
They want to, exactly.
Not always believes the ambitions are bought, you know?
Yeah.
I'll believe
True.
what you tell me to.
But, and I guess that's true maybe because that's where
Power, right.
that loyalty kind of, they can do it for 2 years because that's who's paying their bills for those 2 years. And then, oh, the next person, okay, well, now that's who's paying my bills.
It's the political game. So it's very interesting to see how she is so objective in the thing and still having to like sort of weed out the old guard.
Well, I'm excited to see next week. Let's quickly move into predictions.
Did they tease anything?
She
And now,
has
your
first speech
AfterBuzz
coming up.
TV
but
predictions.
Very interesting.
Yeah, so we see her give her, well, we see a clip of her giving her first big speech. She goes off book. She doesn't stick to whatever the written speech was and clearly says something.
So not allowed. So not what politicians.
Right?
Politicians do not do that.
She did.
They actually don't.
She did, and then she says something. She goes, "Let's do something while we still have jobs."
Yeah, because everyone.
So whatever happened clearly was not okay. Whatever she said, but I cannot imagine what that could possibly be.
I think it's, I don't know if she means that they still have jobs, like something happened, we're going to lose their jobs. I think it's more the idea that, again, like that 2-year, 4-year turnover thing, that it is so hard to affect change in the sort of limited time that you're there. You know, like that lame duck period for a president, like you almost have no time. The first 100 days, they say, are the most powerful days that a president has because you have the American support. Hopefully you have new leadership underneath you. You can like address your agenda very quickly. Then the rest is swimming upstream.
Do we know what her speech is about?
I didn't catch
Very
anything.
interesting to see that she would go off book because especially with foreign diplomacy, the rhetoric used in those speeches is so intense because
and
so specific or non-specific or entirely ambivalent about an issue.
I guess intentional. I don't mean
intentional.
It's intentional.
Absolutely.
Every word is chosen.
Every phrase or epithet used to sort of guide or misguide
to make
people.
everybody happy, though. You don't want to use
calm
a
down
phrasing that's going
everyone.
to offend any particular group of people or culture or country.
Nah, I mean,
You know what I
but
mean?
like, how do you? Basically, a lot of speeches dodge the truth that they don't want to talk about, and then present the truth that they do want to talk about in a way that's very catered.
So I think there's something that she
test
was
every
specifically
word.
told not to talk about, and then she ends up going off book and talking about
Right.
it.
Yeah.
And it's a big enough deal that I think actually when she says, well, let's do something while we still have our jobs, she's like, we could be out of this office any minute. And so
We need to
get now, like
Right.
today in this moment, because tomorrow we may not have tomorrow.
What I hope we get to see, because we don't see a lot of it, especially because she's not a sort of super politico, even though she's so powerful, is I hope that we get sort of see that speech team. I don't know how they're going to be involved in the writing of the speech, but I hope we get to see how those speech teams really do this sort of work. Because it is all polling. They poll what words and adjectives and verbs
Oh my
they
gosh.
should use. I mean, everything is very intentional. So it'll be interesting to see how that works and if they're deeply offended that she just goes off book. Or happy with it.
It'll be really interesting. Well, thank you all so much for listening to another episode of our Madam
you.
Secretary After Show.
Please.
Where can we find you guys?
Right here. At Pat_Lambert.
And you can find me at Sterling Cates.
And you can find me, Courtney Henderson, at COUHEN. Thanks so much for joining us.
So great to be back. Love you.
Woohoo!
Great job.
From executive producers Maria Menounos, Kevin Undergaro, Phil Svitek, and the entire AfterBuzz TV staff, we would like to thank you for listening to the AfterBuzz TV network. To watch or listen to other after shows and post comments or questions, be sure to visit AfterBuzzTV.com. I'm Sir Richard Wentworth, and this has been a presentation of AfterBuzz TV.
Buzz you later.
The views expressed herein are those of the hosts only and do not necessarily reflect the views of AfterBuzz TV or its owners or principals.